Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Szilárd, here with the brand new episode of Road to Iceland. If you're ready guys, let's dive in. Alright, hope everybody is doing well and you had a nice Christmas and a happy new year. Hopefully 2021 is gonna be a little bit better than 2020. Don't want to repeat that year again. So in this episode we're gonna talk about some new stuff. First one, I'm gonna start talking more about training, actual physical training, which is gonna be a little bit later in this session. We're gonna talk about leg workouts because it's not only the time what you spend on the bike gonna contribute to great performance, but also the time what you spend in the gym as well. I'm going to explain to you the simple protocol I use when I put together workouts for myself and for my clients as well. And I'm also gonna do a demonstration on how to do the exercises and then maybe in what order to do them to make sense for everybody. Alright guys, so let's have a look at that protocol I mentioned earlier in the video. So we're going to be focusing on lower body strength today, and then this is pretty much the protocol I use with my own training and with my clients as well. What you want to do is start with a warm-up that usually takes about 3 to 5 minutes. I recommend you to choose exercises which are going to get your heart rate up. So anything like seal jack, jumping jacks, mountain climbers, burpees, skipping, that would be fine. Also, just to make it a little bit more interesting, group them in like 3 exercises. So choose 3 of your favorite maybe, and then do like a minute on each of them, and then do 2 rounds. That's gonna give you about 6 minutes of warm-up. Or you can just choose one and do it for 4 minutes. It's absolutely up to you. You can do some jogging outdoor. That will do the trick for you. Now, the next step is extremely important, is mobility. I highly recommend you to do mobility exercises before you start with your main lifting component, because you want to make sure that your joints are prepared for the upcoming work, and then it also helps to warm up the muscles a little bit. Mobility drills involve full range of motion movements and dynamic stretches. So you can see that we try to work on the range of motion of every single joint, which is gonna be targeted throughout this work. So in case of a lower body strength workout, your hip, your knee, your ankle joints are the ones which are gonna take the load, so this is what you want to focus on, and then the dynamic stretches will help you to lengthen the muscles and warm up. After you finish your mobility work, you're going to move on to the next section, which is going to be the first part of the main component of the workout. I like to start with some power movement. So if that would be a gym-based workout, I would say that clean and press, kettlebell swing, dumbbell snatches, they are excellent exercises to get on with. With knee flexion exercises, you have 2 options, bilateral and unilateral exercises. Bilateral would be something like a squat, unilateral a split squat. Bilateral means that you using both of your legs for the exercise. Unilateral means that you're targeting a single leg. So the next movement in your workout is going to be a hip hinge movement. Again, you got bilateral and unilateral options, deadlift and single leg deadlift, for example. The next step would be a complementary work, such as lunges. Lunges are excellent exercises to complement all the previous exercises and then work the lower body muscles slightly differently. And then as a last step, you would include some accessory or corrective work, for example, calf raises or stiff leg deadlift. And let's say I would give stiff leg deadlift to somebody who has tight hamstrings, because we can work the glutes and stretch the hamstrings at the same time. This is one of my favorite exercises actually. And then once you finish with your session, you obviously want to do some stretches. Now with the stretches, I would be cautious about how strong I go with the stretches. You just did a workout, so your muscles are pretty warm. If you go into a heavy developmental stretch, you might overstretch, so be cautious about that. And then you should be absolutely fine. Let's come back to section 4 and 5 of this protocol, because I just want you to explain that if you choose a knee flexion exercise, either bilateral or unilateral, when you move on to the hip hinge movement, try to choose the other variation. So for example, if you go with the knee flexion, bilateral, so you're going to do squats, then try to use a unilateral hip hinge movement, such as a single leg deadlift. What you can do is, you do protocol A and protocol B. In protocol A, you use knee flexion with bilateral, hip hinge with unilateral. On protocol B, you're gonna swap it up and you're gonna go knee flexion unilateral and hip hinge bilateral. And that is gonna give you a balanced workout. And then you're gonna work on all aspects of different movements. In the future, I'm gonna give you a couple of examples of this protocol with upper body and full body workouts as well. Help you to figure out what exercises to choose, in what order to do them, and what variations to use to create an effective and powerful workout. Now, because of the whole lockdown situation, most of us don't have access to gyms unless you have a home gym or you have decent equipment at home. So to follow this protocol and execute this workout, you're most likely going to have to work with bodyweight exercises only. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick one exercise for each component of the workout, starting from the third section. So the first exercise I'm going to demonstrate is going to be a power movement. Then I will choose a knee flexion, hip hinge, complementary and accessory or corrective exercise. All of the exercises are going to be bodyweight exercises, and then I just demonstrate them. And then so you can take these exercises, put them into your workout, and then execute it at home. I'm going to tell you exactly how many sets, how many reps to do, or if we go against time, I will tell you how long you should perform the exercise. Without further ado, let's crack on with the demonstration. So since last episode we did 2 trips. I did one solo on the 31st of December and then we did one with Tom on the 5th of January. And the trip on the 31st was a 100-kilometer long route what I designed based on the map of the Old Hungarian Kingdom. So what I did was I downloaded a map of the Old Hungarian Kingdom, cut out the silhouette of it, take it, put it on London's map, draw it around, and then I created the route like that without major adjustment. It actually came out 100 kilometers pretty much on the first try. So I was like, that's a decent length. I'm gonna stick to it. And then so I did that on the 31st in -2 degrees. That was cold. It was really freezing cold. But I'm not gonna complain about that too much, because I'm pretty sure that there is somebody in Siberia in -42 degrees doing barbecue outdoors, butt naked. So compared to that, my trip was not much to moan about. Now the second trip was with Tom, and that was on the 5th of January, as I mentioned. And then I keep forgetting, we went to Hampton. So we cycled down to Hampton Court. From there we moved down to Guildford, to Leatherhead, and then from there back to London. I think the route itself was about 120 kilometers. Yes, 120 kilometers, and it took me 6 hours. It took a little bit longer for Tom because he decided on the way home to stop and have a little picnic in Kingston. I stopped a couple of times. I was trying to wait for Tom to catch up, but I obviously didn't know that he stopped for eating. So with the rain and everything, I decided that maybe after 5 minutes it's the best if I just sit back on the bike and then carry on moving, because it was pretty windy. For the 6-hour trip, I think a good 4.5 hours was in the rain. It wasn't heavy rain, it was just showering, pissing down all day. My pants got wet, my feet were wet, and you know, when you stop, the wind is blowing, your muscles are cooling down, and it's just hard to sit back on the bike and start pedaling again. So I was like, wait a couple of minutes and then just move on. But yeah, I didn't even know that he was stopping for a picnic. But he made it back home safe and sound. I was okay, so I consider it as a good trip. Now let's take a quick look at the Strava, starting with the first trip, which was the Hungarian Kingdom's map. So that trip was 95.82 kilometers. It took me 4 hours and 27 minutes. The elevation was 641 meters. The estimated average power was 98 watts. My average speed was 21.5 kilometers, which is not too bad actually. Max speed was 49.3 kilometers, and I burned 1748 calories based on Strava's calculation. So in UK terms, the weather was pretty freaking cold because it was -2 degrees. So that was good enough to keep me on the bike pedaling all the time. So I stopped maybe once to take a picture, and then I had to do a little walk, because when I designed the route I didn't realize that actually I made it in a way that I had to cut through a farm. The mud was melted and wet, and it was so thick and deep that I couldn't pedal through, so I had to jump off and then push the bike for a little while. But then after that I managed to get out on asphalt again, and yeah, that made the bike so dirty. It took me some time until I managed to clean it to an acceptable level. It wasn't shiny, but it was at least on an acceptable level. All right, here we go with another one. Not too bad weather, 3 degrees. Consider it warm, yeah. Where are we going today? Hampton, yeah? I keep forgetting it. So we're gonna go to Hampton Court and then Guildford. Right? Is it Guildford? Guildford, yeah. And then back home. 120 something again. And then likely it's gonna be raining a little bit later, so we'll see how it's gonna go. The second trip happened on the 5th of January, and that was just one day before the lockdown kicked in. So lucky for us, we managed to squeeze that one in, and that meant that we could grab a coffee in Guildford. Now the trip itself was 120 kilometers long. It took me 6 hours and 6 minutes. Elevation was 910 meters. Average power was 85 watts. I don't know how that got calculated. It seems to be really low, even though that I had an average speed at about 19.7 kilometers an hour. And normally with that average speed, my power output would be, based on Strava's calculation, would be at least 95 watts. So I still need to figure out how this thing is calculated, because it's giving numbers like all over the place, or I just can't understand it yet, but I'm gonna have a look into it. Max speed was 53.3 kilometers, which was pretty good. The higher the better. And I burned 2077 calories, again based on Strava's calculation. So this week nothing major happened to the bicycle, so I decided I'm gonna leave the crapometer on the side, and instead I went a little bit nerdy this week and I pulled out some data from my Strava, because I wanted to see if my performance improved anything at all since we did the first trip, which was the Brighton trip in September, 1st of September, up until to one of the most recent one, which was the Hungarian Kingdom map. And actually, if we are already talking about some analytics, let's just hop on and then check out the diagram and see if my performance improved anything since the 1st of September. I collected some of the cycling related data from Strava, and I created a diagram to help me visualize, analyze, and better understand my performance. These trips serve two main purposes. Purpose number one is to discover places that we never visited before, and purpose number two is to physically and mentally prepare for the Icelandic trip. Analyzing the performance can help to realize weak and strong areas in the training regime and adjust the plan accordingly. And if you look at the first graph, you will realize that the columns are grouped into 5 categories based on distance. Group 1 less than 60 km, Group 2 between 60 and 80 km, Group 3 contains the trips between 80 to 100 km, Group 4 is between 100 and 120 km, and Group 5 is the trips which are over 120 km. On the x-axis you will see the average gradient displayed, while on the y-axis the average speed is indicated. The columns in each individual groups are organized by the average gradient in decreasing order. My goal was to figure out the relationship between the average gradient and average speed. So my expectation was that if the average gradient is lower, then the average speed will be higher, which was the case most of the groups except Group 4. The two columns in Group 4 represent Brighton and Oxford, and even though the Brighton was a longer trip with higher average gradient, we achieved a higher average speed. That was simply because of the Oxford trip was miscalculated big time. We meant to have a lunch break in Hamda at about the 60 kilometer mark, but the pub was closed, so we just ended up having some snacks and then we carried on cycling. As a result, I ran out of juice and I switched into a slug mode. I was pedaling so slow, I struggled to move in a straight line. Looking at the other groups, I'm actually happy to see that, except some little fluctuation, the average speed seems to increase when the gradients are lower. Now you might think that this is an obvious relationship, but if you consider all the factors such as sleep, recovery, nutrition, mental state, the bike's mechanical condition, traffic and weather, you would realize that our performance could be all over the place regardless the elevation profile. I also created a second diagram to see if we are getting faster or not. The second graph is very similar to the first one. Grouping is the same, but the columns are sorted by the date of completion in each individual groups. Average gradients and speed are displayed just like on the first diagram. Looking at the columns, we can see that we seem to improve. We are achieving higher average speeds on trips that are similar distances with similar elevation profile. We can also establish that as time goes by, we are able to achieve much the same average speed on similar distances, but with higher average gradients. In explanation, check out group 5 containing our longest trips, where the average speeds of column 1 and 3 are roughly the same, but the elevation profile of column 3 is significantly higher. Now that tells me that our performance is increasing. We still have another 6 months of preparation ahead of us, and things are looking good from the training point of view. I will definitely do more performance analysis in the future, so stay tuned. London became the capital of England sometime during the 12th century. I couldn't find any exact date, so we're just gonna stick to the 12th century. And then the city was originally actually founded by the Romans, and back then it was called Londonium. Today's London is one of the largest cities in the world. It occupies 1,737.9 square kilometers and has 9,304,000 inhabitants from all over the world. Just to put it in perspective, that's about the total population of Hungary. The city is divided into 32 boroughs plus the City of London. The City of London is a unique one. Even though it falls under the jurisdiction of Greater London, it has its own government, its own mayor, and its own independent police force. The most expensive borough of London is Kensington and Chelsea, located just west of Hyde Park. Property prices average at a whopping £1.5 million. It's worth mentioning that Westminster is a strong competitor, taking second place with an average property prices at right around £1.48 million. That is crazy. Well, if the property prices didn't make you crap yourself, then the crime rate will. Westminster is the most dangerous borough in London. 81,091 crimes were recorded in 2019 and 14,565 of them was violent cases, so that means that most likely blood was spilled. To be fair, Westminster is a tourist-infested area that attracts tons of pickpockets, fraudsters, and then there is a parliament too. No wonder the crime rates are off the roof. Now moving on to Budapest. Budapest was made of the official capital of Hungary in 1873 by the unification of Buda, Old Buda and Pest. Just like with London, the city's history dates back to Roman times. In those days, Budapest was known as Aquincum. Budapest is a significantly smaller city, covering a 525.2 square kilometer area, which is less than a third of London's size. The population of Budapest stood at 1,768,000 inhabitants in 2020. That's roughly the fifth of the number of people living in London. The capital of Hungary is divided into 23 districts, all falling under the same jurisdiction. There is no fancy districts like the City of London existing in Budapest. If you got some cash to burn and for whatever reason you decided Budapest is the right place for you, check out the 5th district. The inner city / Leopold town is the most expensive district, where prices average at about £283,361. That's an early 2020 data. The 5th district is also on the top of the podium in regards to crime rates. The situation is exactly the same as it is in Westminster. You got thieves, scammers, and then the parliament. Well, anyways, even though statistically the 5th district has the highest number of crime cases, the 8th district, aka Nyolcker, is probably the most notorious in Budapest. You know, it's a rough area because every single rapper wrote a song about it, even the ones who grew up in the countryside and never been in Budapest. will be returning with a new episode next week where I'm gonna be checking out the highest peaks of London, so stay tuned and don't forget to subscribe. As usual, all of our social media will be included in the description below. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Komoot and Strava as well. If you're digging our content, don't forget to like this video, share with your family and your friends. Stay safe and see you next time.